Delighted to now welcome to the stage, so please put your hands together for Philippe Pouchot-Rouge, Vice President Sales EMEA at ADM BioSolutions, and his panelists to the stage. Thank you.
So whoops, sorry. Are we all here, or should we maybe wait for Chie to come? Yeah, Chie. Thank you. So there are plenty of initiative already in this field, and I think you all have been experiencing in your different areas the new initiative, the new technologies, rising up here and there. We have in Europe. I was recently visiting a few customers. We have in Europe brand new fermentation capabilities. This is really amazing. So we feel the momentum for, there is a momentum at the moment, and it's all about taking the opportunity. At the same time, it's true to say, and it's sometimes a bit difficult to say that, and I'm thinking here also about my country, but Europe is going through a lot of different pressures. So political pressure, economical pressure, social pressure. So this is also raising a lot of questions about will we be able to make it happen? And this is a bit the type of discussion we would like to bring here today. And yeah, so first questions. So these are about the perspective of the introductions. You will introduce yourself, we said, yeah? So when... All
right, you're diving in.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the first question is the perspective on the bio-based market. And we all agree probably, and thank you to Nova, and you know this graph, I'm sure, and we all agree, or we may agree, we all agree on the graph, we may disagree on the percentage on the graph. Defossilization is here. We see the perspective for 2050. And I would like to ask Robert and Lucy, how do you see the future of this bio-based market now? Robert?
All right. Well, thank you, Philip, and thank you for also hosting the panel session today. So my name is Robert Nolles. Just a quick introduction of myself. I've been working in the biochem industry in marketing, sales, business development for over 20 years for various companies, including Corbion, Cosun, and most recently Chie. I'm in the process right now of starting my own business, helping companies to accelerate their business development, to optimize their go-to-market strategy. And well, today in this panel, I'm joined by great panelists. I try to enlighten you with my views on the various topics, and hope that it will also trigger some more in-depth conversations by all of you during the conference. Well, to kick off on the question that is in front of us here, I'm pretty positive about the development of the bio-based economy in general. As we all know, it is not easy, but the general long-term trend is upward. There is some ups and downs, depending on, for instance, economic headwinds or the opposite. And I think we all know that it impacts the speed of developments because, well, if you break it down, in a situation of economic headwind, the companies that we are all dealing with start cost cutting, start focusing at their bottom line profit, and as a consequence, the developments that we're all working on here, they usually are slowing down or sometimes even stalled. But hey, the good news is there's always light at the end of the tunnel. So when the economy is back up again, usually the efforts will continue or even accelerate.
But then, Lucy, the question then is, are we too slow here developing, or how do you feel it?
Yeah. So my name's Lucy Nattrass. It's nice to see you all, and I represent AFRY. AFRY is an international engineering and advisory company with a 130-year history in supporting the traditional bio-based industries and a shorter history, but still significant, supporting the more novel and emerging bio-based industries, such as represented in the room today. I work in our management consulting division, where we have a team which specifically focuses on renewable chemicals and renewable transport fuels, and supporting clients with business developments in this area. On the topic of collaboration as well, I also have 5 years I spent in Nourian and AkzoNobel as an innovation project leader, specifically on this topic of collaborating on bio-based ingredients as well. But to come to your question, I think we see variety. We see some things moving quite slowly and other things moving really rather quickly. And I think it is quite a potentially turbulent time for the market. So, for example, we see with bio-naphtha, potentially huge volumes becoming available in the marketplace as a result of it being co-produced alongside the renewable diesel and the heifer SAF production. So we could see huge increases across towards the end of the decade in the volumes of bio-naphtha available. It could increase to around 1.3 million tonnes of production just in Europe alone by 2030. So this creates a huge opportunity and potentially also a challenge for other like biotech or fermentation-based routes to certain chemicals, because you have a new kind of challenge prospect there. I think that aside from these intermediates that can be fairly easily dropped into the existing supply chains and the existing infrastructure, there is a challenge and things move much more slowly. And the challenge there is that typically what we're seeing with our clients is the sustainability improvement is not really enough. It's not quite enough to justify the investment in time and resources in the product development and verification, in the process development and verification. We also really need to understand the performance of the new materials in order to really justify the business case and the development that's needed.
Thank you, Lucy. Thomas, price. I mean, we will come back on price on question 4, but is price an issue here? Of course, scale is an issue. Yeah. Price might be an issue. We all know the answer, but what do you think?
So rapidly introducing myself, I'm Thomas Canova. I work at Syensqo, which is one of the companies coming out of the demerger of Solvay, a leader in the chemical and material space. So we are focused on specialties. So we have two segments, one focused on high-performance polymers, another one focused on what we call consumer chemicals, so chemicals for home personal care, ag, mining, and we are also in food with vanillin and so on. And I'm heading a platform focused on developing renewable materials and on fostering biotechnology within the group. But back to your point, Philippe. So price, yes, it is a challenge. So there was a recent study showing that 90% of the consumers are ready to pay 10% more in terms of premium for a bio solution. On the other hand, for how long? Because if we look back, so let's make the analogy with quality, let's say in the 90s or in the 80s, right? So there was a differentiating thing by then. So when we talked about ISO for some time, that was important. Well, it's a standard practice. If you do not have the right quality, you are not in the market, right? And here, it's also, when we talk about sustainability, it's also about that. Yes, there is this idea, and the consumers, they understand that. They will need to pay more for this transition to take place. On the other hand, those same consumers, 1/3 of them select inflation as the big issue they have to fight. So they are also ready to come back and question that if there is too much pressure on cost. And so it's quite tricky. So price is an issue, and especially when we also take into account that this industry is not as mature as the chemical one. when we are displacing. So it's not, in the end, we'll have both, of course, so nobody believes that there will be a complete substitution. That's not the case. On the other hand, so we are competing against processes that are quite mature, they are quite optimized, plants that are often depreciated, and so on. So the challenges are big on the value side, but also on the cost side.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Thomas. We move to question 2, which is quite interesting actually, and there are different way to look at this question here. Regulation as a driver for change. As business person, I like to see the change in regulation, the change in legislation as creating, business opportunities. And I'm thinking about the water-based paint at the moment. It has really helped to create a big business opportunity here for renewable material. Chie, could you elaborate a bit more around this? So in other words, are regulation change enough today, or can we get more stimuli out of regulation change?
Yes, we can always use the support in regulation, first of all. And I think it's getting there, but not yet specific or challenging enough to the players in the market. And at the other hand, we see a lot of concentration to certain areas in the, let's say, the materials field. In one sense, there is regulation now on the paper and packaging waste regulation, for example, which is very much stimulating the recycling products. At the other hand, what you see in the previous slide, we need all of them, right? We need the CO2-based, we need the recycling-based, but we also need the bio-based. And what we feel lacking as Avantium, as a technology provider, both in the CO2 and in the biospace area, is that these two areas should be stimulated much more by the regulation, by giving much more clear directions on what is sustainability and how should we drive that through in practice. One important component that we have faced as Avantium when we work together with market parties is that they look at the CO2 emission. So how can they save the CO2 footprint, and how do you calculate it back into the LCA? And this is an area where we think that the government bodies can step up and give more stimulation in either the CO2 credits and giving much more guidance on how the policy and how the ETS would evolve and make more speed into that, so that the market parties then can calculate back on how much CO2 footprint they can save. At this moment in time, we are actually working on premiums. You're talking about premiums of 10%, but there is even more to gather if we are able to monetize that as CO2 footprint savings. And that is really valuable to us, that we show how much you save and how much premium, therefore, you can catch, because most of the companies that we talk to, market parties, do have a very significant target on CO2 footprint savings. And so, hey, if you then also develop the guidance in order to enable them to have a level playing field, transparency, but also a way how to calculate that, then it makes it much more easier backwards in the value chain in order to create value for that. So in that respect, I think regulation can be very supportive in this.
Thank you, Chie. I was thinking, it's true indeed, and I think, Thomas, we discussed it when we prepared. If we don't have that stronger push, then we may end up a bit like on, what's happening now with the organic situation, where basically you have a standard, your standard vegetables and fruits, and then you have the organic channels. Thomas, can you elaborate on this? Do you think there is a future for two economies in parallel, or are we expecting, do we need at some point to say, okay, this one is gone and we concentrate on this one? How you see that?
Well, as I mentioned before, I don't think there will be a complete replacement of the fossil solutions we have. So there is a place for both. On the other hand, there is clearly a transition, and I think that's the right thing to do. So I think we all recognize, and from the society standpoint, that's something that needs to happen, that transition towards renewables, right? And so the question is about kinetics, once again. It's not about thermodynamics. So we want to go there, but it takes time. If we look at the oil prices, for instance, so we are competing against. So from 2005 to 2015, so it was around, in average, around 100, 80, 100. Now it's about 80, right? So there is an additional pressure to compete coming from that. And so the policymakers, they need to understand that and be fast. And the second element I would add to that is that we see more and more region-specific regulations or regulatory framework is a region-specific thing, and sometimes a country-specific thing, even in a region like Europe, right? And so there is a race also in a world that is becoming increasingly demondialized. There's also a race with other regions, right? So we saw the importance of the Biomanufacturing Act in the US. So we see what's going on in China. So everything that how they are pushing biotech after the pandemics. And so in Europe, I think there was some very good signals coming from the policymakers. The associations, they are being quite active. So I can mention CEFIC, Europa Bio, pushing for that. So we are waiting to get the details by the end of this year on how it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move to question 3. So I also like this one about innovation and the way we live our innovation. It's true that the reality of innovation today is highly shielded or protected, by patent protection, by, we have all experimented in our companies how difficult it is to sign sometimes an NDA or a contract, when we have a legal people involved. And in a way, we can understand that, if you develop something, you don't necessarily want others to have access to it. And then you end up into a situation where basically a customer might tell you, well, we have worked during 2 years on a solution, but you might be the only one to supply, so I don't want to have only one sole supplier. Maybe Robert and Yapshi, how can we better collaborate here around innovation, being respectful, of course, of a way of doing business? Or maybe there is another question behind here. Should we completely go to another way of approaching innovation, open innovation with no barriers anymore?
Yeah, if I may, yeah. We call it value orchestration. And it starts already very early in the development. As Avantium, as a technology provider, we're quite in the mid of the value chain. So we have to reach both backwards as well as forward. And I think one good example that we can give of how we can leverage collaboration for innovation is in the preference project that we have within Avantium. It's a EU Horizon 2020 funded project where indeed all the players in the supply chain are participating, but they're already quite early in the R&D stage. The objective is to create a supply chain for FDCA, a new monomer, in order to produce PEF, the new polymer that we're going to produce in our new plant in Delfzijl. It involves brand owners and bottle users like Carlsberg, to converters, to feedstock supply, and to us, the technology provider. And that we basically have extended into the commercial stage where we're in with PEF, where we have captured that into offtake agreements from the plants from different players in the supply chain, more in the forward chain, So again, the converters and the brand owners and the retail, such as Albert Heijn, Heineken, these kind of players, as well as with financial partners. That's very, very important. In order to be able to scale up, you need the finances and the funding. And there is both financial parties from banks and equity, as well as more government-related funding partners, like regional bodies like the Groningen province, or InvestNL, which is a very important institute in the Netherlands to support these kind of innovation initiatives. I mentioned offtake agreements, I mentioned financing parties, and I also mentioned suppliers like feedstock suppliers. So I would say value orchestration, because you are setting up a new value chain, is very important from the beginning, and to take that further into commercialization.
Thank you. Robert, a few words, and maybe Lucy.
Yeah,
you can
to elaborate a little bit more, I mean, obviously it sounds very easy. Oh, we have to collaborate more, we have to, you know, engage better, but there's a lot at stake, right? Individual objectives of the individual parties. However, and this is kind of like touching on what Lin Yap was saying, we actually need that collaboration down the value chain, and this is from my own experience, because the earlier you can align the objectives of, say, an ingredient manufacturer and a consumer goods manufacturer, and sync your timelines, the more likely it gets that you actually will have success. Your chance of success is going to increase. Or, and that's not necessarily a negative thing, you will reach the point of failure quicker, faster failure. And both, to me, are good outcomes, because it means that you can focus on, you put your energy in the things that are really important and have a good chance of succeeding in the end. So collaboration is key, and you can use it for sure to drive your business.
Thank you, Robert. Maybe Lucy, your experience here?
I think there's been a lot of very relevant points raised there with practical experience as well. I think the only other thing that strikes me that perhaps isn't touched upon is also the fostering trust and understanding the culture in the different organisations that you're collaborating with, and taking the time to kind of understand and embrace the culture in the different organisations, so you can be more productive and with that decision-making process.
Thank you. The last question is on the consumer outlook. We touched it when during the first question. Basically, here there is an example on home care and personal care where we see the traction of renewable material or sustainability claim. We all would like to see our favorite brand, you know, putting more emphasis on sustainability. But are we, maybe not we here in this room, but we in this world, are we all able to pay the price? So in a way, we have sustainable solution and sustainable price. Does it go together? Or Lucy, Thomas, what is your opinion here?
Perhaps I'll step away from this industry slightly then from the home and personal care with some examples elsewhere. I guess we've seen significant like societal interest and focus now on the environmental challenges. We've seen with certain industries as well more emphasis and motivation towards reducing emissions, and where that also results in kind of regulation and also political action as well on this. I think we can't underestimate the change that can stimulate. So if I use one example from the transport sector with the Renewable Energy Directive, with the mandates that we have in aviation now and in maritime, we're seeing this in Europe stimulate like huge investments and huge premiums on certain products such as methanol. So biomethanol is around about 40% more expensive than fossil methanol. But through these mandates that we have, we're seeing like around 1 million, 1.5 million tons of biomethanol could come on stream in Europe, globally, but predominantly in Europe, by 2030. Like e-methanol, 170% more expensive than fossil methanol, but there are still the investments going in order to that could result in around 1 to 2 million tons of such e-methanol being produced. Probably not by 2030, but perhaps shortly afterwards if those reach FID. Just say this is an example of how we can stimulate quite significant change and investment with the right policies in place. But I see this is more challenging for the chemicals industry because of the diversity of the businesses that you have within the chemicals industry.
It's also fair to say that the fossil industry is still price competitive and performant. So it's not helping. But Thomas, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we already tackled this point. So it's a competitive industry, quite optimized and so on. And back to that chart. So it's not at all surprising, right? But on the other hand, sustainability is the way we do business today. We have to be sustainable. So there's no other way of doing business than this one. And so it's not because we see that trend upwards that there is additional value being captured there. We still need to win this race, and it's about combining sustainability with competitiveness. And so, and because there is a cost to go through this transition, and that's where, as we discussed before, the policymakers has a role to play. And it's not only about the regulatory framework, it's also about market incentives. We saw what happened in the US and how bold this can be. We see what's going on in Brazil for biological when we have a welcoming regulatory framework. So we see that there are ways out of this dilemma, right? And I would say the last point is it's also positive, just to finish on a positive note, the consumers, as I mentioned before, they are aware that they are willing to be part in that journey. And so if we create the right conditions for this to happen, I'm pretty confident that the consumers will also embark in that journey and understand the role they have to play. And for us and for the industry, it's also about raising the awareness of the consumers.
Thank you, Thomas. We have 2 minutes to go. Robert, you think we should better share the cost along this value chain or to make it more price sustainable for us as consumer, or what is the solution here?
Absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with competition to the petrochemical industry, which is brings decent or good quality at a good price to the market. Yes, it is nice to play that sustainability card. Particularly some premium brands might be receptive to it. But please keep in mind, and I want to warn everyone here in the room, I guess, if you want to reach a certain economy of scale, then you also need to be able to, for instance, for like an ingredient, bio-based ingredient, you need to be able to enter into a mainstream brand. And well, if you want or not, usually the buyers for the ingredients of those kind of brands, they decide on price, performance, and convenience, probably how easy it is to use, to switch out, to change. And sustainability is the nice to have. So it is kind of a catch-22, but I think price competitiveness in the future is super important.
Yep.
May I add one last thing? So it's back to the point you were making, Robert. With that transition from fossil to renewables, what also changes is the optimal scale. So, the scale, the economies of scale that we have in the fossil industry, they are different when we move to the renewable space, right? So it's not about having the bigger and then a bigger and then an even larger plant. Because you have logistics, you have to take into account many different things, feedstock, access to feedstock, and so on. And so that's a challenge because we cannot develop the same level of economies of scale. On the other hand, it's an opportunity because we also have the chance to delocalize part of the businesses we have and find a different model for the industry.
Thank you, everyone. This discussion is coming to an end, so we thank you very much, and we are at your disposal for any further discussion you may have. Thank you.